Fencing, fencing, fencing. Every single one of us livestock owners, no matter the size of your acreage, big or small, need to consider fencing in some way or another. Today, we're going to take a look at the fencing options around pros and cons of each for rotational grazing. Rotational grazing relies heavily on keeping animals moving, so you'll need the option of keeping your fences moving too. There has been so much development in the mobile grazing space. Let us tell you all about what is available now and how they are working for farmers. The three main lines of movable fencing falls into three categories: permanent, semi-permanent, and temporary. So what do you actually need, and what is best suited for what kind of animal? Let's get into it. Let's start with the most structurally sound, classic, and long-lasting permanent fencing. A lot of people will inherit these systems on a farm as well, so it's a good place to start. Just because you are interested in rotational grazing doesn't mean you have to throw permanent fencing out the window. Lands with full permanent fencing actually find a great deal of value in a gated system. If you have the funds or system already, adding gates between each permanent paddock allows animals to move from the used-up patch and onto the greener pastures. This system is great because your labor of moving animals from one pen to another is almost non-existent compared to other temporary fencing systems. You just open the gate and maintain fence lines. It's also a great system to run multiple species one after the other. When the cattle has cleared the top layer, send the pigs in after, and they can dig down to the root level. And when the pigs are done, let the chickens in, and they will get the last of the scraps. The last big benefit is its sturdiness. When we talk about some of the other systems, they tend to struggle in weather or under animal impact, but a good permanent fencing is probably your top tier when it comes to resilience. A lot of farmers do advocate for having a permanent perimeter, even if you are using temporary fencing in between. If the animals escape their temp fence, they at least have the permanent perimeter to fall back on. The downside to permanent fencing is it can get very expensive, even if you're using recycled materials. It's still an enormous undertaking, just in labor alone, but yes, it is effective in keeping your various species separate from each other and safe from predators. All that said, you can have permanent fencing in place with the intention of rotating your grazing fields, but for most of us, this isn't financially or physically feasible. So what about the other options, or subdividing a permanent paddock? Let's get into that. Semi-permanent fencing is any post that goes into the ground for 3 feet or less. And though you can certainly use wood, it's more common to use a lighter material like PVC or metal posts. They're lighter and easy to just pull out of the ground and move when you need to. Semi-permanent fence can also be great for subdividing huge permanent pastures. For example, if you have an electrified perimeter, you can create your own internal pastures with semi-permanent fencing and then just tie off to your perimeter. This is also a great way to test pastures you are thinking about establishing permanent fences, but might want to try it for a few seasons first to observe impact, runoff, grazing patterns, etc. before you make the commitment. While semi-permanent fencing may seem cheap or lower quality, certain brands have really improved the quality of these fences over the last few years. PVC fences that used to only last a few years now have 20-year warranties. What is even more notable about the PVC fence is its ability to bounce. Yes, bounce. When a tree comes down on a traditional permanent fence line, nothing is flexible, so breaking is inevitable, and you will have fence repair. With PVC, we have watched huge trees come down on the line, be removed, and then the fences bounce back with barely having to tighten the lines. That being said, keep an eye on this area as a lot of improvements are being made to systems that go in easily and last a lot longer than imagined. Finally, we get to temporary fencing, the most common and the one with the most questions, especially for the small acreage. It gives you the option to move it daily and go anywhere you want. It's light, easy to move, and just as easy to hook up to electricity. Temp fencing has a lot of pros in that it generally is more affordable, beginner-friendly, and gives you a ton of flexibility while you are learning the land and grazing. It's perfect for people with small herds, especially as the systems tend to be based on sections of 300 feet at a time if we are talking about netting. I will say I personally have a bit of a negative bias about electric netting. This is not shared by all farmers, so take it with a grain of salt and consider your farm's context. Temporary netting needs to be set up well so that the net is tight and doesn't ground by dipping. This also makes it challenging on unlevel surface and hills. To make sure you have a tight fence, when the feet are only a few inches long, this can be an issue, especially if you have compacted soils and those little feet just won't go in. We've broken a few feet more than once. When you move the netting, some prefer to roll it up or drag it, since its wiring and netting tends to become like a ball of knotted yarn if you're not careful enough, and it will pick up sticks if drug on the ground. And if it looks flimsy to you, well, it sort of is. Any animal bigger than a chicken could easily trample it down if it wanted to get out. But that's where the electricity comes in. It's very important that it's kept so electrified that animals do not contest it. When they start testing it is when accidents begin. Pay particular attention to horned goats or sheep, as they can get their horns stuck and caught, leading to being electrified possibly to death. There is a warning on netting about this exactly, and we stopped using it when this happened to us with sheep. Still, many farmers use it successfully. It could be combined with other systems like running an internal hotline at nose height to keep animals away from the net itself, and the net becomes more of a visual barrier. It's also very important to consider the animals when deciding on fencing types. If you have goats that will break out of any pen, you're going to have a bad time and require much taller fencing needs. If you have well-fed, laid-back goats, it's going to be much easier. The same holds true for all animal types. Another type of fencing to consider is multi-reel systems. Reels come in rolls of 3 to 5 lines of electric fencing. You pull out the end posts with the lines attached, and then keep placing the posts in the fence as you go till you reach the pen size you want or run out of line. These are more expensive, but I will say on a personal note, this is what we use and have had a much easier time with. These also adapt to hills and unlevel land better. The step-ins can be placed going up the hill, and it peaks in the ground to help keep the bottom line off the ground, which isn't as easily done with netting since the spans are preset. And the last is the simple reel and step-ins. It's as easy as it sounds, and the most common type of temporary fencing. Grab some step-in posts, set them where you want, and run the lines through them. This is the most common, particularly for cattle, because well-trained cows can go down to a single line of electric to keep them in. You train them in a system with more, very hot lines, and over time they will learn what the line means, and you can whittle it down to one with well-behaved cows. Same for pigs. Many regenerative farmers have been able to get down to 1 or 2 line systems that are near the animals' faces that pack a solid electric punch and will keep the animals in with far less setup. A note: some farmers use a more solid wire for pigs, not poly wire. The aluminum wire is tougher and holds a higher electric punch needed for the tough piggies. The downside of the aluminum is it's not as bendable as poly wire and can snap if pigtailed. At the end of the day, there are plenty of options out there. Finer netting or running lines, deep posts or lighter, shallower posts that make up for their lack of durability with a little current to keep the curious explorers in place. Lighter systems lighten the load when it comes to rotating your herds. Fencing and housing, for that matter, don't need to be anchored down like they did in the old days. With the introduction of plastics, electricity, and solar power, the possibility of moving heavy fence lines opened up a whole new world of rotational grazing that we didn't have before. It's less hassle and safer than ever before. Now we leave the stage to you. What fencing do you have in place, or have you been rotating your livestock with temporary system for ages now? Tell us your takeaways and what pitfalls the rest of us need to look out for that we might not have been expecting. And if rotational grazing is new to you, how do you plan to go about it? You know the drill. Let us know in the comments below. And before you leave, like, subscribe, and keep that notification bell on so you never miss an upload from us. See you next week. In the meantime, if you love the land you're on, it'll love you in return. Bye.